Constance Hauman from New York. Constance is for me Connie because we have been friends for so many years. Constance Hauman is an operatic singer, soprano. Constance just did last year in Vienna a world premiere. We have performed together in Los Angeles. We have been on the same stage in Santa Fe. You have been a very noted Lulu. You sang with Leonard Bernstein, and you have done very different roles. You are also an actress. You were Florence Foster Jenkins in a famous play with an amazing success. You are also a singer of, let's say, more popular song, a songwriter in your own right. You are a coach. You created and you are coaching a band, and you created a very successful recording label. Did I forget anything?
No. Well, wait, maybe. I have a one-woman show called Exiles of Paradise.
Exactly. People ask you, Constance, what's your profession? What do you say?
I get tongue-tied. I would say music, creating, channeling creativity. But first and foremost, music.
First and foremost, music. All these things, they are incredibly connected. I guess your career as a soprano prepared you to be this amazing coach, but what prepared you, for instance, to create a new music label? You need a business skills. You need to be understanding, marketing, and so on and so on. Where did that come from?
People ask me that so often. I guess I would say in one of my marriages, I had a garment company and it failed miserably. And so I learned from all those mistakes no one listened to me because I was the only woman. And I could see the mistakes happening, and my intuition would say that doesn't feel right. But because I was in music and an opera singer, I wasn't taken seriously. So everything unrolled exactly as I knew it would. And so when I started Isotopia, I learned from my mistakes. I learned what I observed, manufacturing garments, and it's all the same stuff because it involves raising money, really listening to your intuition, as well as learning as much as you can so that you can be logical about the steps to take, which is very similar to building a career as well. And I guess it's like being in a constant state of learning and being open to learning and taking all that knowledge. And then I had done many recordings in my career, and I wanted to I kept wanting to do projects of my own. And I thought, okay, well, if I start a recording label, I have freedom. I can do what I want, and I can bring in the people I want. And I thought at first it would be classical, and the surprise of my life was that it wasn't. But it's now the motto of Isotopia is breaking down prejudice through music, because one of the problems, or I should say, I wouldn't say it was a problem, but it was an obstacle without at times realizing it was an obstacle, is in the classical music business, and especially in opera, is the FOC system, or I call it the FUQ apostrophe D system, where you're told you should only sing certain roles. And in my crazy life, I was always offered things out of left field. And people would say, well, you can't do that because you sing this. And I thought, well, then why is this opportunity being presented to me? And I would do it, and it would open the door to something else in my voice, and so it's the same way what I'm trying to do with Isotopia, which is just because you have a label with a classical distributor, because Naxos is my distributor, it's pop, it's jazz, it's instrumental, I have dance artists, I have funk, I have rock, and everyone is a great musician, and many of them have classical training. And I'm achieving my goal, God willing, that in a way, it's what Lenny stood for too. And when I think about how he jump-started my career by giving me that amazing opportunity to step in for June Anderson when she canceled to do Candide, he was such an influence in my life with young people's concerts and just everything. He was a genreless conductor. I mean, he was a composer, and he had no prejudice towards Mahler and pop music, and he was able to teach that as well. And
he was bigger than any category, and he was
yes.
traveling from one category to the other or defining new categories. So you were talking about learning. We'll go back to the recording aspect of your life and the songwriting aspect of your life. I want to start with the singer, the soprano. So when did you start singing, and when did you know you had a voice? What was singing your first connection to music?
No, actually I started piano when I was 6, and my piano teacher was also a composer, Elizabeth Gould Hochman, and her daughter was married to Andre Watts. And so I was obsessed with that, except I had a catastrophic moment in a recital. I was 10 or 11 playing Mozart sonata, and I forgot everything. I sat down and I got stage fright. I mean, it was terrible, and it really traumatized me. And from that moment on, I became like a closet pianist just to learn and to, I played all the time and practiced. And so for this part of my life where I've gone back to the connection to the piano and to the keys and playing by ear, which I had never been able to do, which to me still is like a miracle, it has healed that part of me where it was just like, oh my God, it was terrible. And it traumatized me as a kid. And my mother was a singer, so I didn't really want to sing. And everyone said, oh, she has a voice. And I was in awe of my mother singing, and I thought, well, I can't. And started around when I was 13. She sent me to music camp. I mean, she tried to give me voice lessons, thumbs down, big disaster. Didn't work. And I went to Interlochen music camp, and I was a teenager in my basement listening to Parliament Funkadelic and Led Zeppelin and Aerosmith, and sneaking out in the middle of the night, and just being like a 70s 13-year-old. And I was supposed to go to Interlochen, and I ran away, and my dad found me, of course, at my friend's garage, and they took me to Interlochen, and it changed my life. And I went for 6 summers, and I studied I was in operetta. I had all the leads in Gilbert and Sullivan, and studied piano and dance, and it changed my life. And then we had a fantastic, amazing music director and choral director, Eugene B. Jefferson, who was the only African-American teacher in our school. And he changed our lives and changed my life. And then I did musicals, and I was hooked.
And so that's your first contact and your learning process. But what was your first professional gig, and how did that happen?
I guess I would have to say it was an apprentice at the Santa Fe Opera. Was my first getting paid for something. And I went to Northwestern University and studied voice and political science. And I was very frustrated because I was undergrad. I wanted to audition for things, and it was, oh no, this is for graduate students. And it was again, like, you can't do this. And there's something, when someone tells me I can't do something, that really triggers a lot. And so I had read, actually, my mother sent me something about the Santa Fe Opera in Town and Country. I'll never forget it. And I applied for an audition. I think I was 20, 21 or something. And I made a tape against anyone, the teachers at Northwestern, knowing I was doing it, and got accepted. I went down and auditioned for John Crosby, and I sang Zerbineta's aria, and he dropped his cigarette. And I was the youngest apprentice at that point, that he had brought
Right.
in.
So
And that was an amazing.
your mother was very supportive at that point in your career.
Yes.
Was she still supportive later on in your career? Has she been proud of what you were doing?
Yes. I mean, yes, definitely.
Okay. Okay.
I mean, I have a lot of talented people in my family. My mother and her sisters are all very talented and all wanted to have careers, but they all sang and still sing. And there's a lot of music in my family. And with on going back to my grandmother's generation.
Okay.
So.
So then you mentioned that very important moment in your career where you stepped in for June Anderson in Candide with Leonard Bernstein conducting, and that was in London, wasn't it?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little of that story? It's a fascinating story.
Well, I often say that moment in time was an example of what my whole life was going to be like. The inexplicable, crazy stories, mystical for sure. And after Santa Fe, I moved to New York, and I moved to this building that I still live in because Andre Watts had an apartment here, and it was a family connection. And after Santa Fe, and I had met everybody from New York, I wanted to move to New York. And my parents were reticent, like all parents, and I had a way, because Andre offered, that I could take care of things for him. And I hit the pavement, studied voice and did auditions and got into Texas Opera Theater was one of my first jobs. And I had done, by the time my big moment with Lenny came, I had sung with New York City Opera, and I sung with the Canadian Opera, trying to think, Long Beach Opera, many things. And so my name was out there. And Jerry Hadley, such a great friend. Late Jerry Hadley, and such an important person in my life at that time. When I did Tales of Hoffman with him in Canada, also, it was with Lafayette Mansouri was directing, and the Olympia, it was double cast, she canceled. And so I ended up doing all the Olympias, which was sort of, a preview of coming attractions of what would be a common thing in my career, always stepping in. And so Jerry had said to me, do you know that Bernstein is conducting Candide? I'm singing Candide. You should, get your name in the hat. And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? I mean, so out of the blue, and it could have been Jerry that gave my name, I was asked to audition for Allison Ames, who at the time was at Deutsche Grammophon. And I went down to my manager's house and sang for her and said I was coming to Paris because I was doing my first European contract at Théâtre Champs-Élysées in William Tell with José Van Damme and Lafont, Jean-Pierre Lafont, and Leila Kuberly. And so they wanted me to make a videotape singing Glitter and Be Gay to send to Lenny. So I went somewhere up near your apartment, actually, I remember, to make this video, and I thought it was horrible. And I asked my manager to please don't send it, but he did. And then I didn't hear anything, of course. And I become very good friends with a very famous psychic in New York, and he was teaching me and about things I know how to do. And he kept doing the cards, and he said, you're going to have a moment of destiny in a city like London with a conductor like Bernstein. I said, you know what? I know how this stuff works. You are completely reading my mind. I mean, because Jerry Hadley, blah, 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 and I did this video, and then I goes, no. It's absolutely going to happen. So nothing was happening. And I kept getting other contracts. And I knew it was happening in December 1989. So this is like 1988. And at this time, I was engaged to the late Richard Cowan, and we lived in Paris. And my managers were getting frustrated with me because the psychic, every time I went to him 2 more times, and he said, well, when you meet Bernstein, you're wearing a coat and you've got on a blue dress. And I said, okay, royal blue. I was like, I never wear blue. And he's like, well, you've got on blue. So I turned down Fledermaus in Milwaukee and something else because he said, you have to keep your schedule clear. So everyone thought I was really cuckoo. And I did too, because now it's November 1989 and June Anderson's doing it and they don't have understudies. So I was like, what the hell? And I'd turn down these other jobs. And Richard was singing at Théâtre de la Monnaie. He was, I can't remember the opera, but I was so frustrated that I had blown it. So I surprised him and decided, for the first time ever in my entire life, as I'm known for even traveling with hat boxes and dogs and so much shit, that I went to surprise him with only a toothbrush. And of course I had on a fabulous outfit and I always have on great shoes, which becomes important to the story. But I literally had nothing. I had my little Casio to vocalize with, but that was it, because I vocalized every day. I get there. He doesn't even act happy to see me because he's a nervous wreck because the things weren't going well with the opera. And he had all these Post-its in his dressing room. Please call Kathy Nelson at the London Symphony. So he thought it was for himself, and I did too. So he asked me to, be his secretary and go call. And I went down in the hallway of Théâtre de la Monnaie, and there was Margaret Jane Ray, and to my left, there's people I'd become great friends with years later, but didn't know at all, dancers from the Mark Morris Company and Mark Morris himself. And the phone didn't work and in the hallway. And so I went out to the payphone and pretended to be Richard's secretary. And Kathy Nelson says, oh, we don't want Richard Cowan. We're looking for Constance Hauman. Leonard Bernstein wants her to come to London immediately. Oh my God. I dropped the phone. I go running into the opera house and fell down and ripped my pantyhose. Of course, that was the only pair I had because I didn't have anything with me. I go running in. My heart still beats as fast as it did when it happened because it's so incredible. And Richard's like, oh my God, did someone die? It's like, no, I gotta go to London like now. I didn't have a score. I knew the aria, I knew the duets, but I did not know some parts because I also didn't know that he had rewritten it it was going to be the Scottish opera version. And he had written a duet for Crystal Ludwig, who was playing the old lady. So I didn't know any of this. So there was a coach standing in the hallway. He saw my panic and I said, I don't have a score to Candide. And he said, well, I played it at City Opera. He was American. I can't remember his name. And he had the score at his apartment. So I get in the taxi, I go to his house, I get the score. I go to the airport. It was insane. I land at Heathrow. I don't have a contract, anything. Whisk me to this hotel and call me and say, I have a rehearsal at 11 the next morning. So I don't sleep all night because I'm with my Casio and his score that I don't even know is not the real score. And they call me in the morning and say, it's being moved from 11 to 10 because Lenny is sick. So, of course, I'm a wreck, haven't slept. I don't even know what's going on. I can't call anyone because it's, I think I traveled with a fax machine back in 1985 because there wasn't any. And then I get to, I jump in a cab, it's raining, the traffic's terrible. So, of course, I get there like right at 10:02, and Humphrey Burton, who later became a great friend and wrote the biography on Lenny, in my apartment at Andre Watts' piano, which is kooky since Andre got his break when Glenn Gould canceled from Lenny on the Young People's Concerts, which I watched millions of times, so it's all very psychic and weird. I get run in, they're all yelling at me because I'm late, and it's not even my fault. And the doors fling open, and I'm in this white coat I bought at the flea market at Clignancourt, and there he is. And I'm shaking and crying because I'm going to do it right now. Woof. And there's Lenny. And he puts his arms around me like we've known each other forever. And I was just dumbfounded. And there's Jerry sitting up there with Nikolai Geta and Krista Ludwig. And I had to go to the bathroom. I had to pee. And Lenny looked at me and he goes, "You don't have to pee, kid, just sing." And I was like, how does he know? Guess he's seen a lot of sopranos in that shape. And so I sang Glitter and Be Gay in my coat in front of the whole orchestra. It was incredible. But there was this woman sitting out there in a pink suit that got up and ran out, which I later knew was June's assistant. So I looked at him and I said, "Maestro, I know the aria, I know the duet, I don't know the rest." And he goes, "Good God, somebody get her in a room." So I was thrown in a room with Lucas Brown, Justin Brown.
What did he say when you sung the aria? What was his first reaction?
He jumped off the podium and hugged me like,
okay.
It was amazing. And the orchestra jumped up, and then I had to tell him, I don't know. So they threw me in this room with Justin Brown, and all day. That's when I realized, oh my God, this isn't the City Opera version. This is like a long version. And the dress rehearsal was that night. So they wanted me to do the dress rehearsal. And I just thought, my God, if I have one night's sleep, I'm going to be so much better off. But I was a trooper, and just as I'm ready to go on stage for a sold out dress rehearsal, June shows up. Mm-hmm. And she sang the aria and the duet with Jerry, and then fainted. Let's face it, it was a faint. So they whisked her off, and I had to come on and do everything.
The part you don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my brain was, I hadn't slept, for at least 2 days. And this was, again, before psycho texting and everything. Like, nobody knew where I was. Richard didn't know what was going on. My manager, like, no one knew. I didn't have a contract. It was like, I just got to do this because it was insane. So I was horrible. It was a disaster. I got lost. I could see Lenny's face, like, oh my God, she's a typical soprano, could sing the aria, but thumbs down on everything else. And so they whisked me off stage. They stopped the rehearsal. Then all these people I didn't know come and yell at me. And Jerry, he pulls me aside. He goes, "You can do this. He loves stories like this. What's going on? You have to go in his dressing room and tell him." And I'm like, "They're never going to let me in there." He goes, "Just go in." So Jerry stood there. It was like a little spy thing. He's looking around, and the brigade guarding him left, and he knocks on the door, and he goes, "Go in there now." And I went in, and there was Lenny. And I told him about Andre, and I told him about, the psychic component. And he's listening to me, and he's swigging and smoking, and he goes, "Do you sing Lulu?" And I knew that Evelyn Lear, who I studied with, had sung Lulu. And so we discussed that. I said, "No, I've never." He goes, "You're going to sing Lulu. What do you sing in Rosenkavalier?" So I tell him, Sophie. And he looks at me and he pats me on the face like this. And he goes, "Don't fuck up." And I knew he was going to let me do it. And he walked out because they knocked on the door and said, "You need to go." And he looked at me and kissed my hand. And I knew that it was going to happen. So I went home. I went back to the hotel. And the next day they call and tell me that they're flying in another soprano from someone I won't name from the business who meddled in it. And we had basically an aria face-off because it was going to be televised for the Emperor of Japan, and all these people were coming. So I thought, this is why the psychic said there was a recording, but I wouldn't be on the recording because I got this close, and at least I got to meet my idol, but now it wasn't going to happen. So I didn't give an F and performed like I was on MTV, which I was obsessed with at the time. And first, this other soprano, she sang, And then I did it just for the camera and for Humphrey Burton, and then basically did a talk to the hand and walked off stage and thought, okay, now I go back to Brussels. And Humphrey came running down the hallway and he goes, "Oh, we've got to talk to you. We're choosing you." And I said, "Well, I don't even have a contract. I don't have anything to wear. This is why I've been wearing the same thing with ripped pantyhose for like 2.5 days. So he goes, "Well, Kathy Nelson has a sister who has a dress hire shop. I'll take you to the dress hire shop," because the performance was that night. So we get in his car and I tell him a little more of this cuckoo story, because we're all just kind of like, what's going on? In Emmanuel, in the window of that shop was a royal blue dress, like Princess Diana 80s dress, heart thing with a split up the front with panniers. And I was like, that's my dress. And it fit. She didn't have shoes, but I thought, no worries, I have on Robert Clergerie shoes. I can put the strap under it and it will make a nice line. And I had jewelry. She had some jewelry. So that was it. They get me to the Barbican. I'm so exhausted, and I keep saying, whoever is doing this and making this happen for me, please let it be tomorrow, because I need to sleep. And they're putting makeup on me. I'm in the dress. Krista Ludwig is like twinkling at the excitement of whatever. And all of a sudden the brigade comes. Good God, she's here. She's here. Here. And they literally whisk June in, and they open up the broom closet and put me in the closet. And I'm all made up and I'm standing there. And as I'm like ready to close the door, Krista Ludwig goes, "It's never over till it's over." And I'm standing there, and never mind, it's Krista Ludwig, another idol. And I'm just saying, oh my God. So Humphrey Burton comes and opens the closet door because the curtain's gone down. Because I was at that time too, not who I am now at nearly 60. I was 28. It was like, I didn't know, how to stand up for myself. And I stood there backstage and watched Jerry getting sicker. June was sick and Lenny was sick. And by the end of the long second act, Humphrey looked at me and he said, "You're definitely going to do it tomorrow. You got to go home and get some sleep." So I go out there alone on the street in front of the Barbican, and it's raining. Totally true story. Get a cab, and it's the guy, of course he's Irish, who drove me to rehearsal the morning before. It was just the morning before that this whole thing started. It had been 36 hours. So he said he'd been driving cabs for years and years, that this had never happened to him. He picked up the same person, that he knew I was going to do it. And so I said, "Well, give me your phone number, because if I go on, you can have my tickets, because I don't know anybody." I don't know how I went to sleep, but I did. And I slept. I took my phone off the hook. I slept for hours, like 17 hours, something insane. And at 4 o'clock, they were pounding on my door to get up, because the symphony had been calling because I was going on. But now there was another problem. Jerry Hadley canceled because he was so sick, and they flew in Donald George from Berlin, who had sung. He had sung it in. He'd never sung it in English. So one thing that tickled Lenny to death is on the recording that I have of that night, is that in Candide's Lament, where he says, "But what is war?" he sings, "But what is Krieg?" Because
it's much more powerful. Yeah,
I know, it was so funny, but it was a triumph. And I learned that duet, "We Are Women," and I got to sing it with Krista Ludwig. I did the whole thing off book except for that duet. I was so nervous. I had to have it like right here so I wouldn't forget a word, but I did. And when it was over, and Lenny gave me another huge, unbelievable bear hug, and he whispered in my ear, you missed a word, kid." because I had missed that one word. Right. And then he wrote me a very beautiful note that I have framed with a tarot card. And then I didn't get a video of it to prove to anybody that it had happened till several years later, because of course the whole thing was on Deutsche Grammophon with June and Jerry, and they might have even re-recorded some things. But it was a microcosm of many things to come. And it also was an extraordinary lesson to have something like that happen and then go back to the grind of proving yourself to people and having this amazing thing where it catapulted me, but way later, not at the moment.
Right. Right. But actually there is, you can find on YouTube this excerpt where you sing the aria of Cunégonde with Bernstein, and it's quite extraordinary. So there was still the TV caption got archived, but you could not use it in the time for your own purpose.
I got it around 3 years later, I think. And then, you know, the other amazing thing was Humphrey, well, because then Lenny died 9 months later. And then Humphrey Burton came to New York and wrote a wonderful biography about Lenny in my apartment at Andre Watts's piano. I mean, and then Leonard Bernstein Way became 65th Street.
Mm-hmm.
So I still live here too, which is a very unusual New York story, especially during COVID. Just before COVID, my building has gone through a lot of different managements, and they were going to force me to move so they could renovate my apartment, which I didn't want, and they were going to move me to another apartment. And it was very traumatizing because I'd become a painter and I painted everywhere, and my art was not going to be able to go with me. And then because of the pandemic, they couldn't do construction, so I got to stay in my apartment. So I'm still here.
Typical New York story. The first time I think we worked together was in Los Angeles with the Grand Duchess, with late Gary Marshall. A lot of late
people.
Gary was absolutely amazing, and we did that Grand Duchess. It was the idea of Placido, I suppose, in the time. And Gary said, you know, I don't want to do opera. It's my wife who wants me to do opera. And I don't know how it works. Can you help me? And I thought, you know, he was being facetious. No, he really didn't know. So I thought, like, on the show, you know, it's comedy. The only thing you need to do is it's like a chicken. You need to have the skeleton, and then you push and you stuff it. And every time he would see me, he says, I'm stuffing the chicken. I'm stuffing the chicken.
Well, you were so the right conductor for him. I mean, honestly, you know, I'm your biggest fan.
He was extraordinary. And you started a friendship with him.
Yes.
And that led to several theater projects. Can you tell us a little about this?
Well, again, it's one of the way I got to do the Grand Duchesse with you was because, I mean, it helped that you were conducting. But when the opportunity came up, I was actually supposed to do a modern opera of Alice in Wonderland, a tonal thing at LA Opera, and they didn't even consider me for this. And Gary had gone to the opera with his wife and sat next to one of my mother's best friends, the person who recommended me to go to Northwestern. She's also the late Jill McCullough. She sat next to Gary, and they start chatting, and he says, I can't find a soprano who's funny. I need one who can lisp. And Jill, God bless her, gave him my name, and he wrote it down, gave it to his dramaturg, and she said, oh, but she does Lulu. I mean, she's like serious, you know. So anyway, I came into the audition, and he asked me if I could lisp. And I said, do you want a frontal lisp or shadow lisp? And so for him, he didn't give up about my high C or anything. He's like, she's hired. So then, of course, you were doing it. I mean, it was going to be one of the most fun times of my life, which it was, like amazing hilarity. And so we got on like a house of fire, and he sent his dramaturg to see my one-woman show. He came up to me one day and he goes, you're so funny. How do you do such sad things? I hear you do this sad show. And I'm like, well, it's not all sad. I mean, it is about the Holocaust, so I guess there's a sad component, but it's about composers and musicians. I'm going to send someone to see it. So she came to Washington, and then he graciously invited me to do it for
right. So you have to say
an 8-week run.
You have to say to people listening that Gary was curating a theater, the season for.
Yeah, he had a theater of the Falcon Theater in Burbank. So I did Exiles in Paradise there for 2 months, and he came to every show. He would sit in the back. I mean, and then 2 years later, I was actually in Paris at your house, and he called me and, listen, I know you haven't done anything funny in a while. You want to do Florence Foster Jenkins? And I was like, what? Like, can you sing out of tune? You can lisp, but can you sing off key? And I was like, I think, so anyway, and his theater paid terribly. I mean, it was like the worst. Like, you have to love your craft to go earn $326 a week. So everyone thought I was crazy. But it was the most fantastic experience. And, I couldn't do it for a while in rehearsals. I just couldn't do it. I could not go there. I could not sing out of tune. I couldn't. And one day, I think it's because he walked in the room and I thought, oh my God, maybe he's here because he's going to fire me because he heard I can't do it. And something happened and he fell off the floor, like literally fell over. He was on all fours laughing. And I was like, okay, I found her. And she never left. And it was the most, and he came to every show, of course. But I think that's when my brain shifted. I didn't realize it until like a year, that was 2010. And I started writing music in 2011. And I think letting go of all those years of training and doing it perfectly and having to learn things perfectly to just, let it all go, did something to my brain to let it all go. So that the music I would hear in my head, I can't tell you how it frustrated me that I couldn't play by ear. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand it. And then all of a sudden it was like, I went through a big emotional upheaval as well, and divorced my managers, divorced my husband, divorced everything. I also lost all my money. And I came back to this apartment and it just, something split in my mind, and I started painting and I had nothing to lose anymore because I felt like I'd lost everything, which sort of happened to Florence Foster Jenkins too. And she had to reinvent her life. And I had these synesthesia-like experiences with painting. And then I would run to the piano and go, oh my God. And I would start crying because it was like language that I didn't know I had. And that was the beginning of now what's been 10 years of when I sang at the Staatsoper a year ago. Right now, I hadn't been on a stage singing opera in, I think, 11 years.
Yeah, but somehow that role, so let's talk about that production of Olga Neuvert at the Wiener Staatsoper. Somehow your new life also as a pop singer, I don't know if that's the right word, as a singer, let's say, was kind of morphing beautifully with your training as a classical singer, and you went to that production. So what's the story there? What is that opera about, and why you, and why at this moment in your life?
Well, another crazy out of the blue opportunity that came from left field was Lost Highway, Olga Neuwirth's brilliant opera. The original Alice Renee character, it's based on David Lynch's film, Lost Highway, she'd canceled. And I mean, they hadn't started rehearsals yet, but Olga's scores are very difficult, and this singer just went, forget it. So I was called out of the blue in another extraordinary story, which we don't have time for because it's so crazy. But I got the role, and it was an amazing, fantastic experience. I've had 2 lucky experiences of where an incredible production was done, not because it was just being produced by an opera house, but because it was part of the European Cultural City celebrations. So the first time I did Lulu was at the Queen of Denmark's castle, and it was in the riding stables, and it had enormous amount of money to just make it be such an incredible production where kids were riding. In one of the scenes where I had to be completely nude and Sharon writes the letter all over my body, young girls were writing Ich liebe Lulu all over, like as a part of their walking around town thing. It was unbelievable. It was like my MTV fantasies were being fulfilled by an opera and the way a whole bunch of younger people were responding. So it was the same thing with Lost Highway, because Graz, Austria was chosen in 2002. We did it, I think, three, as the cultural city of Europe. So it was a joint thing between radio and theater and symphony. And so there weren't the constraints of just an opera house, you know, it was an event. And it was and Barry Gifford, who wrote the screenplay, came. David Lynch wrote all of us. He didn't come because he's afraid of flying, but he was, you know, involved. And it became a recording that won the Diamant d'Or, and it was an incredible experience. And I've always been a huge fan of Olga's because she's a visionary and hears outside the box. So she had started writing Orlando as a commission from the Staatsoper, first woman composer, I guess, yes. And she wrote the role of Queen Elizabeth and Purity and Orlando's friend for me. And Orlando's friend, Orlando's son's friend, she had the idea to use a real transgender performer as Orlando's child. So I shouldn't have said son, Orlando's child. And that became the wonderful Vivian Justin Bond. And Kate Lindsay sang Orlando. She was fantastic. And Eric Uranus sang the role of the angel. So anyway, it was a historic, incredible production. And Comme des Garçons did the costumes, which was a dream for me that I would get to meet Ray Kawakubo, who fabulous, amazing designer, and also one of Olga's dreams too. So it was extraordinary. And the way I can credit her as well with Lost Highway to make me start thinking about my voice in different ways, was because in Lost Highway, in that character, she wanted to start really just with speaking. And then there was like a Baroque section, Sprechgesang section, and then move into pop Baroque singing, because there is something very close between Baroque and pop style, and then move into, like, my last scene was like a real Salome dramatic soprano. So in Orlando, she broke through, I think, to even a more, you know, every composer goes through stages, just like painters, and she's in a new period where everything she'd worked on for years sonically was breaking through to new ideas about opera and theater and how to use the voice. So in this way, it was the reverse of Lost Highway, because my role started very operatically as the queen. And then the Purity was a trio of women. So it was like the magic flute, three ladies, and again, a more lyric singing. And then it ended with, she wanted me to improvise with a band on stage and have it be more like pop. So it's hard to believe that was a year ago.
Yes, yes, and it was a huge event in the life of music in our industry, and
sort of like the last big, for me and a lot of other people, I mean, the end of 2019 was, let's face it, it was like the end of, you know, I live across the street from Lincoln Center, so it's really eerie every day. I walk by and just say a prayer. It's
right. You are writing your songs, you're writing the text, you're writing the music. These are absolutely beautiful songs. You are recording them. People can find them on the usual Spotify, I suppose, Idagio maybe, and
everywhere.
Everywhere, they are everywhere. And when you write a song like this, what comes first to you? A poetical idea, a text, a chord progression? How do you build your songs?
It actually comes in all three ways. I can never predict. I mean, I've had some songs where it's like downloading. I hear the whole thing and it just goes, and then there's others, like I have a new record coming out in January called Tropical Thunderstorm that's more really jazz in a way. And the title track, it was a poem that I wrote. And then I did an improv with my drummer on piano, and he's on drums. And all of a sudden I went, oh my God, that poem would work. And I don't know why I thought of that. And then he was like, he's so used to how crazy I work. And I just took the poem out and just started improvising with the poem, and it worked. It was as if it was always supposed to be what it was, but it was 2 years later. And then sometimes as I'm writing verses, I know it's going to be a song, and I start hearing it, and then it comes together. It's like a joint thing. So, but I also do a lot of improvs, and then I don't listen to them for days. And then I go back and I was like, oh my God, where'd that come from? And then I realize I can either make a song out of it by taking certain segments and we rearrange it so that it becomes like a real song formula of verse, pre-chorus, chorus. And then my latest thing, Quarantine Trilogy, I didn't even put words to anything. It's just improv of piano, synth, drums, and bass, because I felt like the voice shouldn't be on it.
Are you also writing songs for other artists?
Yes. Well, and then I play, one of the most wonderful moments, I would say, makes me want to cry. I have to hold my nose so I don't, was at the Staatsoper for the opening night that I could have. I call them my children, but they're not really. They're my colleagues, my band that I put together for my singer and Miss Velvet and her band. It's Miss Velvet and the Blue Wolf. But I can't.
So you're managing the group?
I manage the band, and I produce. I'm the producer. I created the band for her because her voice is so extraordinary, and she's worked with me since she was 17, and it's like it's developed into, I don't know of any female rock voice like that out there. And she had gone to other producers where they wanted her to sing how she looked, which was very familiar to me from the opera world. If you sing Zerbinetta, that's what you sing. And, you can't sing Kate, because that's a mezzo role, when I was asked to do Kate in the film of Madame Butterfly. And it's like, why? It's a movie, like, who cares? But she encountered this, well, you're tall and blonde and thin, so you can't be like a male rocker. So she went through her own journey of going to other producers where it was just thumbs down, did not work. And I said, please, you've worked with me, I've developed your voice. Please let me put a band together for you. Please let me, so that you can just be who you are. And it's turned into something really extraordinary and led me to take the band and her to United Sound in Detroit to produce our first record, which was Where Parliament Funkadelic, and George Clinton produced all their records, as well as Aretha Franklin, Red Hot Chili Peppers. So that was the beginning of an incredible odyssey that, when I think about it, just blows my mind, because it's 4 years ago, the last election, we were all in Detroit. And during those 4 years, we have done 110 shows on tour with George Clinton and Parliament Funkadelic. And our second album I produced along with others in the band. George is on the album, and he came to opening night in Vienna. He walked into the Vienna Staatsoper. There was George Clinton sitting in, a box, and the whole band came, and Miss Velvet came, and it was so perfect to have, that representative of all styles of music in that opera house where the greats were. Oh God, I get so emotional about that stuff. It's nuts. I mean,
did they get the show? How did they connect to the show?
It changed their lives, and I knew it, because they're all great. All these guys are such great musicians, and I love them like they're my children. No, because I could see where they were, you know, if they were given the opportunity, where they would go. And it's unbelievable. And when I think that, I mean, I think myself in my basement at 13, listening to all these bands, and that now I'm doing it. It's so fantastic and crazy. And they were, some of them stayed and saw 2 performances because they were just so blown away. And George loved it and wants to do an opera himself. And I mean, it was just an amazing, amazing experience. Right. And to hear the Vienna Philharmonic, which of course there was major drama with them, and because she had a band on stage, and then there was the orchestra, and there was like 109 musicians total. So it was a very beautiful arc to starting in Detroit in 2016, and we went to the Tallinn Music Week in Estonia, which really started us, because you know, we could talk for hours about the politics of music in this country, and the lack of support and the commercialization of something, and that we couldn't get into South by Southwest Festival in Austin, even though I had taken them there the year before and done an unofficial showcase. The corporate part of all of that, they shut us out the next year because I hadn't gone, you know, through certain political channels. So I took them to, we went to the Tallinn Music Week in Estonia, and where it was how all music festivals should be. And we made amazing connections there to PR people in Germany and other places. So I thought, you know what? My opera career started because of Europe. It always did better in Europe. I always had, you know, I had some good experiences here in the States, but the major artistic, beautiful, life-changing experiences were all in Europe. So I thought it's going to be the same way for this band, and it was. And then George, I took a psychic, you know, thing like he's got to get this record. And long story short, and an amazing story too, he got the record, and we were asked to open for him at BB King's on Halloween. We were going to get 10 minutes, but I didn't care, because at least, because everybody in the band, all the guys are just like, have beyond crushes on Parliament Funkadelic, because they're one of the greatest bands of all time. So the minute someone heard Miss Velvet's voice and heard the band, they were filming on their phone, and I saw them run out, and I thought, they're going to show that to George, and he's going to realize where's good live as what he's heard. So long story short, instead of doing the, you know, the shitty opening 10 minutes at 6:30 when no one's there, they moved us to 7:30, and he gave us generously 40 minutes. I'm going to cry again. That was the 40 minutes that changed our lives, because then he invited us to play with him in Washington, D.C., and that second show turned into a whole year doing the Mardi Gras tour, and then that turned into going to Europe with him, where he graciously allowed me to hire a really great sound engineer to record it, because I thought, I want to produce a live album of Parliament Funkadelic, because they haven't had one in years and years and years. So that's coming out next year on my label, and to celebrate 50 years of Parliament Funkadelic. And then we went to Japan with him and Australia, and we went all over the United States again this last year. And we were supposed to do like 85 shows with him this year. Of course, they were all canceled.
Right,
so,
right. Connie, the hour is flying. I have stories many times, but every time I hear them, I'm just absolutely amazed. And what is stunning with you, Connie, is that all your stories, there is a connection and another connection and another connection under the table, and everything makes total sense. And you have had 10 lives already. And I know you will have many more, but they will all connect together again and again.
I know, it's so crazy, but it just makes me, you know, I'm finally at a point where I think it's all making sense, because I've had some very you know, troubled times with myself of not understanding the craziness in my life, and also being misunderstood by others. Oh, she's flighty. Oh, she changes her mind. Oh, she's, no, stuff's happening to me. I can't even control. I don't know what's going on. And now, though, it makes sense and it feels so good to be almost 60 and go, I know why my life has been this way.
Right. And the things that might look like, oh, that didn't work. In fact, no, it's part of the whole person.
Whole thing. And learning.
And
it's all part of learning. Like, you know, Noxos too. I mean, everyone said, you're crazy. You can't go to a classical distributor for this. Well, they didn't think so when they heard my first album, and it was exciting to them to open up their doors to other things. Because again, it's like, why does music have to be so categorized that it's not, it's alive. Music is alive all the time. That's why I love you as a conductor. You've got that Lenny thing. You've got it. You make everything fresh and new. Like it should be that way when you play it, like you're in a jazz band, like you're in a rock, but like you've never, like it's new. You've never heard it before. You need the technique. You need to have the knowledge, but then you have to throw it away so that it's fresh, so that it vibrates, becomes alive.
Right.
And you know, there's a lot, maybe that's all getting cleansed during this period of everyone reevaluating and what they value. And of course, having a world right now with no music is terrible. And hopefully it's going to make people rethink, you know, why does it have to cost so much? Are there other ways to bring in money? And because we have to have it for our health. We have to have it.
Right. We absolutely need this. We need people like you who are just such source of inspiration, such testimony of the power of resilience and making things anew again and again. And just because you love people, you love life, and you love the arts. And Connie, thank you so much for this. I love you. I hope we'll be able to make music soon together. I don't know what kind of music, but I know we'll be together.
We will. And I miss Paris so much. Oh my God, do you believe I still have a storage room there with all my stuff? Oh, I got to deal with that.
I see you there very soon. Much love. Thank you, Connie.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.